The day had started like any other, with me sipping my morning coffee on the porch, watching the neighborhood come alive. Birds chirped, cars passed by, and somewhere in the distance, children were laughing on their way to school. Everything felt calm, ordinary. Little did I know that my entire world was about to shift in a single moment. I had been waiting for weeks for my son, Daniel, to give me news about his engagement. He had been dating a young woman named Emily for nearly a year, and though I had only met her a handful of times, I could tell she was special to him. The way his eyes lit up when he mentioned her, the care with which he spoke of her, it was undeniable. A mother always knows when her child is truly in love. So naturally, I had been expecting an announcement. Maybe a fancy dinner invitation or a phone call saying, "Mom, we're engaged." I pictured myself helping with wedding preparations, shopping for dresses, tasting cakes, choosing flowers, and maybe even walking into the church with tears of joy streaming down my face. That morning, Daniel called and asked me to stop by his apartment. His voice sounded cheerful, but there was something in his tone, a quickness, a slight nervousness, that caught my attention. I brushed it off, assuming maybe he was planning to surprise me with the engagement news. My heart fluttered with excitement as I got ready, imagining how he would break the news. When I arrived, the door was already half open. I stepped inside and found Emily sitting on the couch, her hands neatly folded in her lap, her face glowing with happiness. Daniel stood beside her, a strange mixture of pride and hesitation in his eyes. I smiled warmly at both of them and blurted out the question I had been dying to ask. "So, when's the wedding?" Emily glanced at Daniel, then back at me. Her lips curled into a soft smile, and with a calmness that shook me to my core, she said, "We got married yesterday." The words hit me like a thunderclap. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her correctly. Married? Yesterday? My ears buzzed, and I felt the room tilt slightly. I gripped the back of a chair for support, staring at them both in stunned silence. "You what?" I finally managed to say, my voice trembling. Daniel stepped forward quickly, holding his hands out as if to calm me. "Mom, please let me explain." But I couldn't hear him. Not yet. My thoughts were racing a mile a minute. How could he have gotten married without telling me? Without inviting me? Without even a hint of preparation? 1,000 questions burned in my mind, but none of them could escape my lips. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the two people who had just changed everything. Emily reached out and touched my arm gently. "I know this must be a shock," she said softly, "but we had our reasons." Reasons? What kind of reasons could justify leaving me out of the most important day of my son's life? My chest tightened as an ache spread through me. I felt excluded, betrayed, and deeply hurt. Finally, I sank into the nearest chair and buried my face in my hands. Daniel knelt beside me, his voice thick with guilt. "Mom, please don't be upset. We didn't mean to hurt you." "Didn't mean to hurt me?" I whispered, lowering my hands to look at him. My eyes brimmed with tears. "Daniel, I'm your mother. Do you realize how much I dreamed of being there for you on that day? How could you take that away from me?" He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Emily clasped his hand, as if drawing strength from him. Together, they seemed united in something I had no part in, and that stung more than anything. Emily finally spoke again, her voice steady but gentle. "There were circumstances, things you don't know yet. We didn't want to keep you away, but it all happened so fast." I swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to scream or break down. Part of me wanted to walk out, to slam the door, and never look back. But another part, the mother in me, wanted to understand, to cling to my son no matter how deeply he had hurt me. "Tell me everything," I said finally, my voice stern but breaking at the edges. "I deserve to know why you did this." Daniel took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, we'll tell you." And so they began. As they explained, I listened with my heart pounding in my chest. Emily's family had been facing a difficult situation. Her father was gravely ill, and he had expressed one final wish before his time ran out, to see his daughter married to the man she loved. Time had been slipping away faster than anyone had expected, and the doctors had warned that he might not last another month. So Daniel and Emily had made a decision. Quietly, swiftly, they arranged a small, intimate ceremony at her father's bedside. There were no big decorations, no flowers, no dresses or tuxedos, just a minister, a pair of rings, and Emily's father smiling through his tears as he gave them his blessing. When Emily described how her father had held her hand and whispered his gratitude before the vows, tears rolled down her cheeks. Daniel's voice shook as he added how meaningful it had been, how beautiful in its simplicity. My anger began to waver, replaced by something else: sorrow, understanding, and a pang of guilt for not knowing what Emily's family had been going through. Still, the wound in my heart ached deeply. "But why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I could have been there. I could have stood by your side." Daniel squeezed my hand. "Mom, we wanted to tell you, but everything happened so quickly. Emily's father's condition worsened overnight, and we couldn't wait. It was the hardest decision I've ever made." I closed my eyes, taking it all in. Part of me still felt cheated, but another part realized the gravity of their choice. It hadn't been about excluding me. It had been about honoring someone else's final wish. Silence fell over the room as I tried to process it all. My heart still hurt, but I couldn't deny the sincerity in their voices. Slowly, I lifted my gaze to meet Emily's tearful eyes. "I wish you had trusted me enough to be there," I said quietly. "But I understand why you did it." Emily leaned forward, her voice breaking. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Daniel wrapped his arm around my shoulders, holding me close. And though the ache remained, a tiny spark of healing began to flicker in my chest. The days that followed were a strange blur of emotions. On one hand, I tried to wrap my head around the fact that my son was now married. On the other, I couldn't shake the sting of having been left out. My heart tugged in two directions, between the love I felt for Daniel and Emily and the deep ache of betrayal that still hadn't healed. That night, when I returned home, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at an old photo album. Pictures of Daniel as a little boy, with his bright smile and mischievous eyes, stared back at me. I remembered his first steps, his first day of school, the way he used to hold my hand when he was scared. I had been there for every milestone. And now, for the biggest moment of his adult life, I hadn't even been given the chance. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Emily's voice echoing. "We got married yesterday." The next morning, Daniel called me again. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Mom, Emily and I were wondering if you'd come over tonight for dinner. Just the three of us. We want to make things right." I hesitated. My instinct was to refuse, to let them sit in the discomfort of their choices. But the thought of growing distant from my only son hurt more than my pride. After a long pause, I agreed. That evening, I walked into their apartment once again. This time, the atmosphere was warmer. Candles glowed on the table, the smell of roasted chicken filled the air, and Emily greeted me with a nervous but genuine smile. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, ushering me to the table. I nodded, still unsure of my feelings but willing to listen. As we ate, Daniel finally spoke. "Mom, I know we can't change what happened, but we want you to know that we're not hiding from you anymore. We want you in our lives, every step from now on." Emily nodded eagerly. "I've always dreamed of having a close relationship with my husband's family. I don't want to lose that before it even begins." I studied her face, the sincerity in her eyes. She wasn't my enemy. She was a young woman who had made a painful choice under extraordinary circumstances. Slowly, I felt some of my walls begin to crumble. But still, I couldn't stop myself from asking, "Emily, can I ask you something? Did you ever once think about how it would feel for me to find out that way?" Her eyes welled with tears. She set down her fork and nodded. "Every day since. I regret it deeply. But at that moment, all I could think about was my father. I didn't want him to leave this world with his last wish unfulfilled." Her voice broke, and a single tear slid down her cheek. My heart softened. I thought of how I would feel if Daniel were in her place, if I had one last chance to witness something so important before leaving this world. I understand, I whispered, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. Relief washed over her face, and Daniel smiled with visible gratitude. That dinner became a turning point. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I began to know each other better. She visited me often, sometimes bringing over home-cooked meals, sometimes just stopping by for tea. We talked about everything, her childhood, her dreams, her fears. Slowly, I started to see what Daniel saw in her: kindness, strength, and a quiet resilience that made her shine. One afternoon, as we were having coffee on my porch, Emily suddenly asked, "Would you like to see the wedding photos?" My breath caught in my chest. Part of me wasn't sure I was ready, but I nodded. She pulled out her phone and handed it to me. The images glowed on the screen, simple, intimate, and deeply emotional. There was Emily in a modest white dress, her father lying in the hospital bed beside her, his frail hands clutching hers. Daniel stood by her side, his expression filled with love and determination. My throat tightened as tears blurred my vision. It wasn't the grand wedding I had always imagined for my son, but in many ways, it was more powerful. It was raw, real, and filled with love. When I handed the phone back, Emily whispered, "I'm sorry you weren't there, but I promise you this: when we have our celebration, you'll be at the very center of it." I frowned slightly. Celebration? Daniel, who had been listening from inside, came out and joined us with a grin. "Yes, Mom. We've been planning. We want to throw a proper reception, a big celebration where all of our friends and family can be there. And you'll help us plan it." For the first time in weeks, genuine joy bubbled inside me. It wasn't the traditional wedding I had expected, but maybe this was even better. I would still get the chance to see my son celebrated, to dance and laugh and welcome Emily into our family with open arms. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning. Emily kept her word, involving me in every decision: flowers, music, food, decorations. I found myself swept up in the excitement, my earlier pain slowly fading into the background. On the day of the reception, I stood in the banquet hall, my heart full as I watched my son and his wife greet their guests with radiant smiles. The room buzzed with laughter and music, the air alive with joy. When Daniel took the microphone to make a toast, he looked straight at me. "Everyone, I want to thank you for being here. But most of all, I want to thank my mom. She raised me, guided me, and stood by me even when I made choices that hurt her. Mom, I love you, and I'm so glad you're here tonight." Tears streamed down my cheeks as the room erupted in applause. Emily stepped forward, embracing me tightly. "You're not just my mother-in-law," she whispered. "You're my second mom." And in that moment, every wound healed. Every ache, every regret, every tear, it all melted away in the warmth of love and family. The reception carried on late into the night, filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. I watched as Daniel and Emily swayed on the dance floor, their faces glowing with happiness, and for the first time since Emily's shocking words, "We got married yesterday," I felt at peace. But peace doesn't come all at once. In the quiet moments after the celebration, doubts still whispered in my mind. Would things ever truly feel the same between us? Would I always carry that ache of being left out? One evening, about a week later, Emily came by alone. She held a small box in her hands, wrapped in gold paper and tied with a satin ribbon. "I wanted to give this to you," she said softly, placing it in my lap. I untied the ribbon carefully and opened the box. Inside was a framed photograph. My breath caught. It was a picture from the bedside wedding, Daniel and Emily standing together, rings freshly exchanged, with Emily's father smiling faintly from the bed. But what struck me most was that Daniel was holding a photo of me in his hands. My hands shook as I lifted it closer. "What is this?" I whispered. Emily's eyes shone with tears. "Daniel wanted you to be there so badly that he brought your picture with him. He said, even if Mom can't be here in person, she'll be here in spirit." The dam inside me broke. Tears spilled freely as I clutched the frame to my chest. I hadn't been there physically, but in some small, symbolic way, I had been there. My son had carried me with him, even in the moment I thought I had been forgotten. Emily reached out, squeezing my hand. He loves you more than anything. And so do I. We'll never let you feel left out again. In that instant, the last bit of bitterness dissolved. My heart was lighter, full of gratitude. Over the following months, our bond deepened. Emily became like a daughter to me, often stopping by with groceries or just to chat. Sometimes we'd cook together, laughing over spilled flour or burnt cookies. Daniel would roll his eyes at us, but I could see the happiness in his face, watching the two women he loved growing closer. Then one spring morning, as I tended to my little garden, Emily appeared at the gate with an envelope in her hand. Her smile was mischievous, her eyes sparkling. "What's that?" I asked curiously.
She handed it to me.
"Open it." I tore it open and gasped. Inside was a sonogram picture. "We're having a baby," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. My knees nearly buckled as I stared at the tiny image on the paper. A grandchild. My heart swelled so big, I thought it might burst. Tears blurred my vision as I hugged Emily tightly, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. Daniel came jogging up the path, joining our embrace.
"Surprise, Mom.
You're going to be a grandma." That moment became the most precious gift of all. The pain of the past faded completely, replaced with the promise of new life, new love, and new beginnings. Months later, I was in the hospital room again, but this time, not for a wedding. I stood by Emily's side as she held a tiny baby girl in her arms, her cheeks glowing with tears of exhaustion and happiness. Daniel leaned over her shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Meet your granddaughter, Lily." I reached out with trembling hands and cradled the little bundle. Her tiny fingers curled around mine, and in that instant, everything felt whole. I thought back to the shock I had felt the day Emily first told me. "We got married yesterday." At the time, it felt like a betrayal, like the breaking of a bond one had cherished for so long. But standing there, holding my granddaughter, I realized something profound. Sometimes love doesn't follow the path we expect. Sometimes it's messy, complicated, and even painful. But if we open our hearts, love has a way of healing all wounds. As Lily stirred in my arms, Emily leaned against me and whispered, "You'll always be part of our family story, from the beginning to forever." I smiled through my tears, pressing a kiss to Lily's soft forehead. And in that moment, I knew the truth. I hadn't lost anything at all. I had gained everything. The story that had begun with shock and hurt ended in laughter, healing, and a new generation of love. What started as the words I never expected, "We got married yesterday," had transformed into the most beautiful chapter of my life. And as I rocked my granddaughter in my arms, I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for my son, for my daughter-in-law, and for the family I thought I had lost but had, in reality, just begun to find.